You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, and welcome once again to another journey into the unknown, the unexplored, the unexplained. Ecto Portal. This is Anthony Anderson, and I'm your host, and I'm here with my co-host.
A very thirsty Verna Wilson, who forgot her water.
Did you say very Thursday?
Thirsty.
Oh. She's very thirsty. She forgot her water. She'll be awfully dry, you know.
And I don't want to go to the store on a break because it's too damn rainy.
Anyway, tonight's show, because I haven't even said that yet, is the Ghosts of Flight 401. Yes, in 1972, there was a Eastern flight to the Florida Everglades, and it crashed. And mysteriously, the spirits of the crew members of that flight have been seen on other flights after that. And there are also stories of parts from that crash plane being reused on those planes where those spirits have been seen. So that's tonight's show, and we'll get into that in detail. December 29th, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 descended towards Miami after its flights from New York John F. Kennedy Airport. The mood of the 4-month-old LT011 N310EA was upbeat. 163 passengers and 13 crew members were looking forward to enjoying New Year in the Florida sunshine. The TriStar, as the aircraft was also known, was one of the most modern and technologically advanced of its day, and the pride of the airline fleet. N310EA, shortly after it had entered service with Eastern, the TriStar, dubbed Whisperliner by the carrier, had only been in service for 4 months when it crashed. So 4 months, remember you were just asking that. The flight from JFK had been uneventful, but as the crew prepared for landing, the first in a chain of events occurred which would eventually lead to the loss of 101 lives. First Officer Albert Stockstill was instructed to lower the landing gear. Alarmingly, the crew had noticed that not all of the wheel indicator lights had turned green. Captain Robert Bob Loft believed that it was just a faulty light bulb, so Stockstill began to remove the light bulb. While Flight Engineer Donald Don Repo was down in the avionics bay, or hell hole as it's referred, situated below the flight deck, to visually check to see if the gear was down. Now, the TriStar was traveling at 227 miles an hour when it impacted in the Everglades. As the pilots attempted to resolve the issue, they failed to notice that the autopilot had disengaged, and they were now slowly descending towards the Florida Everglades. Now, if you know what's in the Florida Everglades, that'll make you think.
Yeah, snakes.
Alligators.
Alligators, snakes. Yeah. It's
in the dark.
Yeah. It's dangerous for any human being to be in there.
So not only is your plane crashing, your plane's crashing into alligators and snakes in the dark.
Right.
The TriStar was traveling at 227 miles per hour when it slammed into the alligator-infested swamp just outside of Miami. Many of the passengers were killed instantly, and those that did not survive faced an agonizing wait for rescuers to reach the crash site. First Officer Stockstill died upon impact, but both Repo and Loft survived the initial crash. Repo was rushed to the hospital, but later succumbed to his injuries. Tragically, rescue was also too slow for Captain Loft, who died at the scene. Now, the subsequent investigation into the crash cited pilot error as the main cause. The crew failed to monitor the altitude as they tried in vain to deal with the undercarriage problem. Tragically, it was later revealed that the nose wheel had indeed been locked in place, and it was just a faulty bulb.
Jeez. And,
So again,
Captain
it's-
Loft, he was a 30-year veteran pilot.
Yep, but this was simply he bumped the wheel with his knee and it locked into place.
Oh, jeez.
As all of them were preoccupied with this little light
It didn't have
bulb,
to happen.
and they were slowly. This plane was literally just going down as they're playing with this light bulb.
It's crazy.
Although the majority of N310EA was destroyed, certain parts, such as the galley, were salvageable. Eastern and Lockheed agreed that these parts could be reused and fitted into other TriStars on the production line. One such aircraft was N318EA, and as the weeks and months passed, strange goings-on began to occur.
I think the third pilot, Repo was his last name, he used a porthole to try to get a visual on the gear when it was...
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Yeah, okay, right. That's what you just said, yes.
Do you see where I'm at? Do you want to pick up?
No, go ahead.
Okay. JFK Airport, 1973, Eastern Airlines TriStar was boarding for flight to Miami. Okay. Traveling that morning was one of the airline's vice presidents as a VIP passenger. He was allowed onto the aircraft first and made his way to the first class cabin. As he moved towards his seat, he noticed a company captain in full uniform and went over to have a chat. During the ensuing conversation, he suddenly realized he was speaking to Bob Loft. The apparition quickly disappeared, and Vice President rushed off to find a crew member, terrified that it could be an omen that something would happen to this aircraft. A search of the plane was carried out before any of the passengers boarded, but there was no sign of the mystery captain. A few months later, at JFK, a crew boarding the same aircraft was surprised to see Loft already sat in the flight deck. They apparently chatted to the ghost, not realizing who he was, before he vanished right before their eyes. The flight was later canceled as the crew were too shaken to operate.
There was also reports of people spotting them standing in the aisles, occupying the galley and the cockpit, and they would be standing there. They'd turn around and then they were gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the L1011, flight engineers would usually arrive at the aircraft before the other crew to carry out their pre-flight checks. This particular day, a flight engineer was stunned to see an Eastern second officer already in his seat. He immediately recognized him as Don Repo, and the apparition said to him, "You don't need to worry about the pre-flight. I've already done it," before disappearing.
And there was also another incident where there was a female passenger, and she described an ashen-looking person sitting in one of the seats. She described him as dazed and unresponsive, and she was so worried about his appearance that she summoned an attendant to investigate him. And the man vanished before their eyes, and those of several other passengers that were sitting there. And the original crew, the original witness, they were so distressed that several of the cabin crew, had to forcibly restrain her. And it took a while, but she eventually calmed down, and she was shown photos of several of the flight staff, and she picked out Don Repo in the photo.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some weeks later, another captain was checking the instruments before a flight from Miami to Atlanta. Staring him right in the face was the unmistakable outline of Repo's face. The captain claimed he distinctly heard the words, "There will never be another crash on an L1011. We will not let it happen." During a flight from Atlanta to Miami on board N318EA, the flight deck crew were enjoying their meal as they cruised at 39,000 feet. Suddenly there was a loud knocking coming from the hellhole. By now the ghostly stories had been circulated around the company, and the crew was reluctant to look, but the knocking continued, and as the flight engineer opened the hatch, he was horrified to see the face of Repo staring back at him. Terrifyingly, this is where the engineer had been when Flight 401 had crashed. Can you imagine hearing this knock
I can imagine
below where the pilots are, and you open up the hatch, and it's the guy that died down there?
There's also another one about a mechanic that was one of the former flight attendants. They said that Captain Bob Loft, he's often earmarked as the subject of another haunting. There was a witness, a flight attendant. She insisted that she saw an engineer working to repair an oven. And when word of this reached the only engineer on board of this plane, he denied ever fixing the oven, and he went as far to say that it didn't even need fixing in the first place. And in other reports, another flight attendant, she selected Don Repo's photo from a choice offered to her. She saw him fixing it, but the engineer on board said it didn't need fixing. So, yeah.
So far, the majority of reports of spooky goings-on and ghostly sightings have been swiftly swept under the carpet by Eastern Airlines. What airline would want passengers thinking that their aircraft was haunted by dead flight crew who perished on the pride of their fleet? Although the airline had point-blankly refused to believe the spooky stories, the sightings were all reported to the Independent Flight Safety Foundation, who later commented, "The reports were given by experienced and trustworthy pilots and crew. We consider them significant." Eastern went on to warn employees that they could face dismissal if they were caught spreading the ghost stories.
Because they didn't want to scare everybody. They didn't want to scare make everybody
Passengers,
paranoid.
the crews,
Passenger, the
yeah.
crew. There was another one about Captain Repo warning them about a fire on board. They said that at the time not much notice was taken about it, and then later during the flight, although there were problems with the engines that all stemmed from a fire that nobody... There were problems with the engine later. It stemmed from a fire that no one knew about, and the final leg of the flight was canceled as a result of this fire. And apparently somebody saw the ghost of him warning about the fire.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
These ghosts were busy. I've never heard of ghosts of like the same, one or two guys making all these appearances.
They keep making all these appearances. It makes me wonder if from a spiritual point of view, they were doing it just to make sure nobody else ever had to experience that. They were kind of...
Well, you heard what he said, and there's never going to be another one of these flights that's going to have any
they
problems.
Probably thought that they were doing good by
checking warning.
Yeah.
But it'd be weird though, especially if it's one of your co-workers who died,
right?
And then you recognize them or you see them, and you're like, go up and talk, and then they disappear on you in front of your eyes.
Especially if passengers keep seeing them and they keep getting reports about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you recognize people, you know who they are. You've worked with them.
If you work with them all the time, yeah.
That particular flight that you were talking about, where he could be seen in the oven door.
Yeah,
that was fitted on board. The flight reached Mexico City safely, but the return leg problems began with the starboard engine. After inspection, it cleared to take off. As sightings became more and more frequent, rumors circulated that pilots and crew refused to fly on the L-1011s that had parts of the doomed jet fitted. Paranormal investigators requested numerous times to be allowed on board the aircraft to see if anything could be recorded. The airline continually refused. Well, I'm sure that's the case because they don't want people... That just drums up more manic mayhem for passengers and crew.
And you don't need that on an airplane.
No. So, I mean, I could see why it come to like that, having a continual problem. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could do that in a private sense where you could let them on the plane to do the investigation, but... not publicize it, keep it private, let us know what you find, we'd be curious.
It just makes me wonder I always wonder about the ghost's point of view. How were they able to follow those parts and when they were put on another plane? I mean, how did they...
Well, the airline can, because they have to write down... When they salvage the wreckage, there's actually photographs.
Yeah, right.
If you go online, there's photographs of the crash. And I'm sure the airlines are down there picking every piece they could find, because that's what they do with the crash, to find out how it crashed. They collect every piece they can find of the plane.
Right.
And they bring it back to a warehouse. And then they look through it and decide, can we reuse this on another plane? I mean, it's expensive. You don't want to throw stuff away that's perfectly usable on another plane that's being built.
Right.
That's very similar.
Yeah.
So that's what they did. They cataloged everything they could use.
Uh-huh.
And they had a big pile, too. A big pile of this stuff in the warehouse.
I'm sure they did.
And they went through and they figured out what was good, and they sent it off to the plants to use in other planes.
Yeah.
So they have a record of every single piece that was reused in another plane from that plane.
But these people are already passed away. So does that mean they kept up with they followed exactly what they were doing? I mean,
What do you mean? The ghosts?
The ghosts, yeah. They were passed away.
Well,
they are,
I don't think anyone's going to know that except them.
Well, I know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out
what
what's
their
going, what
modus
was going,
operandi
what were their
was?
motives. Yeah.
That's a good question. Are they
Yes.
there to warn the crew? Are they there to protect the planes?
And how do
Are
they
there
know
to follow the parts?
And how do they know where the parts were? How do they
distributed?
know? Yeah,
That's a good question.
Right. And you also notice that the ghosts that they describe are of the former pilots. There's
Yeah.
no stewardess or any passengers
No, just the pilots.
that they spotted. Just the pilots. Yeah.
Which is interesting. But they're the ones responsible for the aircraft in the air. So
Right.
maybe they felt compelled.
They felt compelled, to do good, yeah. They say, however, all of the salvage parts from 401 were later removed from the suspect jets. The ghosts of Loft and Don Repo were never seen again after that. But their haunting words came to protect Eastern's L-1011 fleet. It came true. In the years after the crash, until the airline's closure, there was no other fatal crash on the TriStar fleet. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, they said that it's nice to think that those dedicated pilots might have kept the rest of the L-1011 fleet safe. So even though they were never seen again, the fact that they kept coming on these planes, and it's almost like they were guarding it.
It's like guardians after the fact.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to make sure this stuff doesn't happen again.
Right, and they said M31 HEA later went on to fly for Hong Kong carrier Cathay Pacific and Eastern Airlines. It was Eastern Airlines was consigned to the history books when they ceased operations in 1991. But the stories of Flight 401 it still circulates today, and even among the airline industry, it's very famous.
Pretty wild story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, the impact in the Everglades, this is the actual crash itself. I'm dropping down a little bit.
Yeah.
The crew did finally notice the situation taking place, but nowhere near in time to prevent the inevitable. Flight 401 crash landed in the Everglades at over 200 miles an hour. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, the main fuselage broke into 4 main sections and many other smaller pieces on impact. This killed the first officer instantly. Burning jet fuel engulfed the aircraft as it plowed through the swamp. The aircraft disintegrated, scattering wreckage over an approximately 1,600 feet long by 300 feet wide. The National Transportation Board also reported that 67 passengers survived the carnage and 94 perished, as did 2 of the cabin crew. Captain Bob Loft survived the impact but was so severely injured that he died during the rescue efforts. Don Repo survived long enough to reach the hospital, but he proved too badly injured. The disaster of the flight still remains as the worst in American aviation history today. There are some sightings of both those pilots. After the crash, they begin to have encounters with some of the crew members, passengers.
Now, they mentioned that when this, I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of go off track here for one moment. They mentioned that when this plane crashed and some of the locals in the area actually ran to the site to help the crew. Mm-hmm. And they were given
fisherman or something.
Yeah, they were given humanitarian awards afterwards because a lot of the crew and a lot of the passengers got saved because of these people.
He literally was going. I think it was like him and 5 other guys. That's all they could find.
Yeah,
were going around in these, those long boats they have in the Everglades.
Right.
They're fishing boats. They use fish. They fish with them to get, I'm sure, crawdads and whatever.
Yeah.
They were literally going through the swamp at night with a light, and you can hear. Some of the passengers were alive, some were dead in the water, and they were pulling the ones that were alive as they could into the boats.
Yeah, as quick as they could.
As quick as they could so they don't drown. Some of them are near drowning or already drowned because they just passed out in the water.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible.
So
yeah.
they were pulling them to rescue a lot of them. But yeah, you're right. They did get humanitarian awards.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, how come the rescue team was so small? It's like you crashed in the middle of the Everglades in the middle of the night.
Right.
It's not like rescue crews are there waiting for you.
And there's not many people who hang around in the Everglades in the middle of the night.
No.
But these were probably people who live nearby, and they fish for a living, so they probably decided, let's get our gear and help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know helicopters, as soon as the light, the sun came up, helicopters did show up, and that's how a lot of the crew members who did survive, they said that's when they knew that finally they were going to be rescued, as they heard those helicopters come to help. Because I can imagine laying there half dead, bleeding, wounded.
It's all wet.
You don't know what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible.
And then you hear someone coming, you hear helicopters, like, oh, thank God, somebody's coming to help.
Yeah.
Now, Captain Bob Loft is often earmarked as the notorious subject of the haunting, but the truth is Don Repo was far more active and more regularly witnessed. One time, a working flight attendant saw an engineer working in the oven. We already discussed that. And there's different staff encounters. A crawl space beneath a cockpit is one thing, a galley oven's another. An attendant of TriStar 318 was so shocked to see Repo looking back at her, she called other members of the crew to confirm. The flight engineer on duty during the flight was a personal friend of Repo and instantly recognized him and that of his deceased friend. Repo warned them, and that was the fire on board. There's just recycling parts of the aircraft. Here we go. This is an interesting section, I think. And you were saying this too.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Yeah.
Corporate decision to use undamaged parts of the flight on other jets. Some believe that the Eastern Airlines cannibalized and reused pieces of the wreckage in other airliners. If this is true, then perhaps they recycled more than just aircraft parts. Eastern Airlines denied anything was wrong with their aircraft or their personnel. At no time would officials of the company allow or condone anyone to investigate the reports. And this is very much, while this is all very much in the public domain, reports were circulating that the aircraft engineers quietly removed any materials they had reused from the crash. A company folded in 91 is perhaps still known for some more compelling and credible paranormal encounters to date. The majority of the witnesses are the most professional of professional people and simply not sort of people to invent stories. I don't see it here, but I know reading another article that's mentioned the airline kept having these sightings, and it was spooking them. They're like, you got to do something. You got to pull these parts. Apparently, the airline quietly did replace all those parts in those other planes, and the sightings ceased.
Right.
So that's interesting. Where you were saying, remember, you were asking, are they connected to the plane? Are they connected to the crew? Are they connected to the pieces from the plane
Right.
that went into other planes?
Yeah, that's it. I was wondering, how would they have known where all the parts went? How could they have tracked it all down from the ghost's point of view?
Yeah, I don't know, because that's a good question, though. I mean, if you were a spirit and you were still around and you could hear everybody's conversations, would you stick around the crew that survived? Would you stick around the planes that maybe had the pieces? Because that doesn't make sense to me. Why would you bother to stick around? I mean, recycle pieces, that's more superstition. Whereas if I was going to hang around the crew members that were alive and kind of keep an eye on them and keep an eye on the planes that they're in, like, did you check that? I already checked that. You're good.
Well, that would make sense. But on the other hand, if they don't want anything to go wrong, they could have, if you're a ghost, you're standing around wondering what went wrong. You're going to stand around your old colleagues. You're going to stand around everybody in board meetings and say, okay, this is what we're doing with this part, and this is what went wrong. And they're probably following what was happening during and after to the plane and to.
Well, maybe there's no real rhyme or reason. Maybe they're just going wherever.
Right.
Crew, planes.
Most people don't think of these things from the ghost's point of view, but
We do.
we do because
That's exactly what we do.
because it's not common to see pilots, especially in full apparition, people recognizing pilots on a plane where the recycled parts are. This is uncommon. So it makes me wonder what went through their minds where they knew where these parts were. How did they follow that?
Now, saying you're using the angle that's what they were following.
Well, yeah,
Now,
because that's
to me. If you're a ghost and you're hanging around, you've piloted a number of these planes in this fleet, not just that one.
right.
So you're used to going on other flights
Yeah.
all the time. Mm-hmm. Who's to say you aren't basically doing your old job, going on these flights, doing your flight checks? Mm-hmm. People see them. Of course, the people who lived the plane crash, mm-hmm. see their coworker and like, oh my God, look who it is.
Yeah.
It's Bob. Mm-hmm. So that startles them, but then humans have a way of trying to make sense out of everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, we
Right.
have to know, why would the spirits come back and why would they be seen on the planes? Not all the planes that they had parts on them did they have sightings.
No.
So it's not all of them,
Okay, it's not all of them, yeah.
but we want to know, why would they keep coming back? Why are they coming back with some of the same crew members? Are they reliving the experience? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I can kind of see part of why they came back, like the one about the oven being fixed.
Yeah.
The mechanic claims the oven didn't need fixing, but somebody spotted one of the former captains trying to fix it. So maybe he thought something was
They
wrong.
saw his reflection in the mirror.
He saw his
So they were
reflection in the
looking at
mirror,
it and
right?
They saw him in the
They saw him,
reflection.
and then there was a fire warning, and they didn't pay attention, and then they realized that there was probably a danger of a fire. So I can kind of see the part about I want to make sure everybody's safe and this doesn't happen anymore. I can see that.
But who's to say you wouldn't do, if you were going to work, like you always go to, let's say you died at work, not that you would die at work,
Right.
and you went back to work, even though you passed away, your routine is you go back to work. Mm-hmm. You're watching everybody do their jobs. You probably would sit down at your desk because you weren't really sure what's happening.
You know, I can tell you now that can happen even when you're alive.
No, I know, but I'm saying what I'm trying to describe here is you're going back somewhere familiar. Something happens. Someone's going to knock something over, and it's going to affect them.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it, and you can stop them, but you may not think, "Oh, I'm a ghost. I'm warning someone." You're thinking, "Oh my God, watch out! Don't let that fall on you." And they see you, and then they don't see you anymore.
Well, the reason why I said that is because I remember an incident some years ago where I actually moved to another job, but somebody who worked on a different floor kept walking past the window where I sat, and she said she saw me sitting there for a week.
I remember when you told me that.
She said she saw me sitting there for
Isn't
a week,
that weird?
and I was already gone.
That's so
And
weird.
when she found out that I moved to another job, she got shocked and she called me and she goes, "I didn't know you were in another job." And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "I've been there for almost a month now." She said, "I was walking by and I've been seeing you for a week at your desk."
That's kind of creepy. That kind of reminds me of doppelgangers. You ever read any about that?
I have, yeah.
Where they're not really, it's not you. It's kind of like a lifeless version of you.
Right.
Low energy. You're just there. You exist.
Yeah.
And that's what they see.
Yeah.
You got to wonder if that, I don't know, that's so
That's why I
weird.
say I'm not surprised it happened with a ghost who died, but it can also happen when you're alive too, because
yeah,
because
absolutely.
of that incident
Yeah.
where this friend saw me. She says she saw me sitting at my desk for a week. She kept passing by the window
They're
and
like,
seeing
I
me
swear
there.
I saw you. I know it was
And
you.
I told her, I said, well,
Yeah.
I said, you must have known and she goes, no, I swear, I know I saw you. She said, I've been seeing, she said, it was for a week I saw you. I know it.
See, that's weird.
That is really weird.
See,
and
and
I already moved to the new job. Yeah.
And I just think with these guys, even though they're dead, they're on planes, they're pilots, they're used to being in the galley, they're used to sitting in the cockpit, getting ready to fly the plane.
It's kind of habitual.
Yeah, it's habitual. Absolutely, because that's their job. That's their life.
It
Their
could
airline
be what
pilots.
you call residual energy too.
You know what?
Possibly.
As I go on with investigations, I don't really believe in residual energy.
Yeah,
And- and the reason I've
never believed it either.
The
But
reason I say that
Yeah.
is it goes back to what I just said. We are creatures of habit.
right.
We continually do the same things each day at the same time.
Yeah.
Just because you're dead, if you're still around, who's to say your habits aren't still there? You're like, you know what? I better
I
go to
agree
work.
with you.
I better go home.
That makes
I
more
better-
sense than residual energy to me.
And you're going to keep doing these because that's what you did. It's your
Yeah.
life. You were comfortable.
Right.
So to me, like, oh no, it's just a replay like a camera. Well, that's a pretty big assumption
Well, when
to me.
well, I've heard other stories where somebody passed away and they were doing their usual stuff, including one of my own mother. The guy who moved into her new apartment. He was very nice to me, and he said he would spot her every once in a while. He moved out real quick because he was spooked, but. Yeah, he was.
Wow.
No, he did. He moved
Oh
out
my
after
God.
3 months because he was too spooked.
That's
but
weird.
he kept saying that he spotted her, and he spotted her doing, like doing stuff,
Normal stuff.
normal
that she
stuff.
Did.
And Linda and I spotted her around my apartment doing normal stuff too, because she would come in every once in a while. So
See?
it was kind of the same thing. I haven't spotted that lately, but yeah, at first, yeah.
So
not
maybe somewhere else she's still doing her normal routine
right.
where she's at in the same location. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
And you occasionally get a glimpse of that, which isn't surprising.
And then Linda had a dream where she was doing her normal routine and she saw one of our relatives come up and stop her and told her, that woman doesn't exist anymore, you have to go with us. And then we never heard about it again.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's weird.
So I think it relates to this story. They were probably doing their normal routine for a long time.
Yep.
And people kept spotting them, and then they wondered, why the heck am I seeing them?
Exactly.
Yeah. Have they gone back to the Everglades since then and seeing if they found any parts or anything left over from that crash?
I didn't read anything about anyone going
Have
back.
they ever interviewed any of the former crew or any of the former stewardesses who survived?
There's some on YouTube.
There are.
There's some of the flight.
Oh, wow.
One of the main flight attendants is still alive, and she's the one that describes. The two of them describe, saving passengers, trying to help people as much as possible, until the helicopters came, until they actually had help.
I wonder if one of them would be willing to come on the show and talk about this further.
I don't know. That would be really interesting.
That would be really good.
especially if they had the sightings of the crew members. That would be
Yeah.
something. Yeah, we should look into that.
We
That'd
should
be
look
an
into
interesting
that.
show.
Yeah, bring one of them on. Yeah.
Just see what their experiences are.
If they
and
want
what-
to, if they're willing to talk about it now. I know it was tragic for them, but
Yeah.
they're on YouTube, so
Exactly. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how old they would be now, but
those interviews were done some years ago. I take it.
72, so they're probably in their 20s. So add it up.
Yeah,
How many years is that?
yeah, it's quite a while.
60, 70. They'd be in their 70s maybe now?
Probably, yeah. That's not. But if they're willing to talk about it, that would be great.
Absolutely. It would be great.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. We'll be landing shortly, so please put your seat in an upright position. Please fasten your
Stay
seatbelts.
safe.
And we'll be on the ground in just a few minutes. The weather is pretty wet and rainy outside, but I think we'll make your departure, your connecting flights on time. And until then, have a good night, and we'll see you
We
next
serve
week.
brandy on the plane.
Yeah, well, yes, we do. All right, we'll see you next week. Bye. Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.